You're killing me, Smallz.
Hey guys, Colleen Wolfe from NFL Network. And look, you may or may not know, I'm from Philly. I'm ride or die Philadelphia, but especially when it comes to sports. So you guys need to check out Mike Small on the Killin' Smallz podcast. This guy crushes it, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say next.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Killin' Smallz podcast. I am your host, Mike Small. This podcast is a proud member of the Painted Lines Podcast Network. We focus on interesting sports content and not people screaming and yelling at each other with hot takes that are actually just ridiculous. This is the Thinking Person's podcast. But before we get started, I want to invite you to follow me on Twitter at RealMikeSmall, and I'll follow you right back. Also, please subscribe to the Killin' Smallz podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a rating, give us a review, and that would be very much appreciated. On today's podcast, the never boring, always unpredictable, and never short on drama Philadelphia 76ers. Wow, what a week. Our guest will be my colleague, Jason Blevins from the Painted Lines. Jason spoke with Joel Embiid about a half an hour before getting booed last Friday night against the Memphis Grizzlies. I know he's got some great insights from the locker room. He's got to know Joel pretty well, and he's going to break down with me the most confusing, confounding, but also pretty fun team in the NBA, your Philadelphia 76ers. All right, let's welcome my guy Jason back onto the Killin' Smallz podcast. JB, you've been a busy guy lately. You've been at a lot of these Sixers games, and you were in the center of a bit of a controversy this week. So you talked to Joel during or before the Bulls game. You talked to him for about a half an hour. Can you share any light on that conversation?
Actually, I talked to him before the Memphis Grizzlies game, before the first time he was booed.
Oh, okay.
Last Friday. And that was a surprise. And I think actually, I was so surprised by that reaction on Friday night. That was the first time that I tweeted out. And there was a lot of, depending on where you sit in the arena, I think you hear different things. So there was some pushback on whether or not he'd gotten booed. He liked that tweet, which is, I think, why people think I'm in the center of it. To be honest with you, it's a thing I would not like to be in the center of. I do have pretty strong opinions. I don't think booing your home team during introductions makes a lot of sense for me, which is why I think I was put shocked by it when it first happened. It happened again on Sunday, and then last night it was muted, but it was definitely not a enthusiastic welcome that he got pregame last night. So he's talked about it over the last 4 days or so. What matters is that he's heard this, and he has responded pretty strongly on social media, and then he talked again about it last night after the game. Just that, if he can take it, then the fans should be able to take it back when he responds.
Yeah, you know what? I have that sound from last night. Let me play that real quick.
Like I them. We all human beings. If I can take it, then everybody else can take it too. So we move on. We learn from it. We move on. I got to do a better job. They got to do a better job. I understand where they come from, but then again, if you dish it, you gotta be able to take it back. So, but at the end of the day, like I said, in my location last night, it's all love. I love my city. I've been here for a long time now. We have a special relationship, and I'm happy to be here. I can't wait for the future, especially this year. I think we can accomplish something great.
Yeah, so he was pretty clear that, still has all the love for Philly, but if Philly's going to boo him, he's going to let them know he doesn't love it, and it's going to be back and forth. Whatever you think about that, what insight do you have? You've gotten to know him a little bit. What insight do you have on the way he thinks based on, how your conversation with him before that Grizzlies game?
Well, I think the thing that I try to tell people is that Joel's more introverted than people think. He's not a natural extroverted speak up guy. Now, he's very funny, but it's in sort of like a droll way. He will make low key sort of comments that can get under opponent's skin. He knows how to take little jabs, and but he's not someone that is out there like a Shaq or a Charles Barkley that's going to constantly be chirping and running his mouth. And the other thing I would say is he really is part of the city, and I've heard a lot of commentary over the last 4 days about how athletes should think about the people of Philadelphia. And my perception, quite frankly, and this is going to sound harsh, but my perception is Joel Embiid is much more Philadelphian than many of the people who come to that arena and boo him. What I see is, people from Delaware County maybe, or from New Jersey who come across the bridge. They listen to a lot of sports radio and they think they're going to go, vent their frustration. Joel lives in the city during the off season. You see him walking around the city. You see him playing tennis in the city. You see him, playing basketball with people in neighborhoods. He is truly a Philadelphian. He came here at the age of, I think, 19 when he was drafted. So you have to think about it like that. He is, and he said it last night. He said, this is my city, and I love it, and I could be better, and they can be better, right? So that was the big quote. I think he takes ownership and he takes pride in being part of this city and this culture. So what I perceive from the vocal minority of fans is you've got a lot of 55-year-olds who maybe talked at their holiday parties with their families to their grandsons, and that's sort of the two edges of people.
See, now why do you have to go with the 55-year-olds? I'm not quite there yet, but man, it's close enough that that's a painful thing to hear.
But listen, we've all been to the holiday family parties where these kind of topics come up, right? And what I see is people who have followed him through his career and really have been with him since the beginning. I think they're much more realistic about what he offers, what his special sauce is, and what some of his challenges are.
I've literally not seen, I've been a Philadelphia sports fan my whole life, and I've not seen the city just gravitate to somebody, maybe Chase Utley, maybe Reggie White, but he's right there in terms of, in my opinion, of the city just grabbing onto somebody and making him their own. And so this was hurtful the last couple days, honestly.
Yeah, I on a human level, when you get to know people and you look them in the eye and you know that you'll have to go back and look them in the eye again in a few days, that completely changes your perception. But if you step back, and you brought up Reggie White, right? So I think Joel Embiid is in a tier of athlete that is much closer to a Reggie White on a historical basis than a Chase Utley. Chase Utley is, great Philadelphia athlete, led them to a World Series. But if you go back through the history of second baseman, is he a top 100 second baseman in all time Major League Baseball history? I'm not even sure he's top 100. So, we're talking about an athlete who, at his position, there have just been very, very few of. When you're going to compare him to other NBA centers, you're going to talk about Doc Rivers talked about it last night. He compared him to Kareem, and he compared Ben Simmons to Magic Johnson. So the comparisons are going to be Shaq. They're going to be Hakeem. They're going to be Kareem. Right? Maybe
I mean, I'll let the sports talk radio show host debate that part out. But the thing that I'm really interested in, and you're a really good person to talk to about this because you're around the team a lot more than I am for sure, is the chemistry with Simmons and Embiid. Do you think it's overblown? I mean, I listened to about 3 podcasts today, national podcasts. I had Kendrick Perkins talking about how they hate each other on and off the court. I heard, a couple of other people talking about how they can't work together, although I did see some really nice pick and rolls between the two of them yesterday. Do you think it's overblown?
I think it's just the wrong conversation. So I do think there's a challenge in a couple of areas, both of them being soft-spoken, introverted guys, both coming at the game of basketball from completely different backgrounds. So Ben Simmons had a basketball in his hand, dribbling with both hands at the age of 3. Ben Simmons is much more comparable to Tiger Woods, whereas Joel Embiid never even thought about basketball until he was 15, 16 years old. So on a basketball, like the tactics, the angles, the geometry of the game, it's hard for them to have those sort of intellectual conversations because Joel is a relative novice, and yet his ability to pick up the finer skills, the shooting, the post moves, the dream shake, things like that, is just remarkable. Like it's almost it's virtuoso level on the finer point skills. So I don't think that they have a ton of common ground. I don't think that they have a ton of conflict, though. So I think that's the part where I think the conversations are really misguided.
On a human level, I'm going to interrupt you here. So on a human level, you see, Ben Simmons and Kendall Jenner laying out in bathing suits in Miami. Then you see Joel Embiid taking shots and having Jimmy Butler comment on his Instagram. And I mean, I just get the feeling when one does one, the other one's just rolling their eyes. And I don't know, maybe that's just me, or maybe that's, and I just don't know if it unites the team at all or if it has to.
Right. Yeah, that's the big question is, does it have to? I think Joel's a homebody and Ben likes going out and living a more glamorous lifestyle. Joel Embiid would be very happy, like I said, playing in a park, playing tennis in a park at night in Philadelphia. I think Ben would be very happy on the beach with Kendall Jenner. It's two different mindsets, two different personality types. Not a lot of common ground off the court, but there's not a lot of conflict. And I think that's the key that people need to understand. When you say that they can't get along or they hate each other, that is not true. It's just not true.
Do you think there's a mutual respect?
I do. I think Ben knows enough about the game to really understand what is special about the other guys on the team, and I think Joel highly, highly respects the basketball IQ of Ben and many of the other players as well. Now, I think Joel can sometimes slip into sort of that novice mindset of like, well, why don't you just shoot it? Why don't you just shoot it? That Ben gets critiqued for. Because, Joel learned to shoot from watching YouTube videos. So to him, those kind of things are easy. Whereas to Ben, he thinks, well, don't you understand you're supposed to roll here, or you should cut there, or don't you see that the double is going to come from this spot? So the things that they think are easy are very different, and it really comes down to if they get it together, they can complement each other's weaknesses. And if it turns ugly, it could be a thing where they both point at each other for being, lacking the thing that they can do well.
You heard the Brian Windhorst report yesterday about, teams lining up, hoping that the Sixers are going to trade Embiid because it's hard to get a star, especially one that's 25 years old and is the best player at his position. Do you think that there's any meat to that?
Any GM who's not trying to load up in case there's a division in a team and someone becomes available and they're trying to load up assets, they shouldn't have one of the 30 general manager jobs if they're not trying to do that.
Yeah, but do you think that's even viable?
Specifics.
I agree with you there, but do you think that's just hype? Do you think? Look, I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, and I know that's not fair to in a certain sense, but
no, it's fair. It's really clear in my mind how this goes. If things go south and they disappoint in the playoffs, Brett gets fired, right? You replace your head coach first.
No question.
Give another head coach the opportunity to come in, try to galvanize this team, try to work with the talent that they've got. If that doesn't work, now either your GM is gone, and then the new GM will have no loyalty to any of these guys, or a GM who doesn't feel they have job security, maybe makes a panic trade, and that's when you would see one of those two get moved. So, none of that stuff is really worth talking about while Brett Brown is still the head coach, and he's got a big. The stakes are really high for Brett Brown and for everyone, but he's the first. If you're going to go through the sequence of what change would happen, that would be the first change. Absolutely, no doubt.
Yeah, I totally agree. Jason, let's take a quick break. So as we're talking about mindset, you need a new car? You better get in the right mindset to get a good car person. You can get ripped off out there, and if you don't have somebody that you trust, it can be a major problem. I've got somebody I trust, and I hope you all will too. Several people have benefited by listening to the Killin' Me Smallz podcast and have bought cars from Kobe Fryer at Matt Blatt Kia. I've known Kobe for 35 years. In fact, little known fact, I drove him to his first ever job interview to be a car salesman. And look at him now. He runs Matt Blatt Kia, and they've got 3 locations in Toms River, Egg Harbor, and Glassboro. Check out the new Telluride, which was the Motor Trend SUV of the year. They've got over 250 pre-owned cars and trucks. Any situation can be handled with ease. Give Kobe a call, 609-706-2101, or get in touch with me through this podcast, and I will connect you.
This is Ian Rappaport from NFL Network. You're killing me, Smallz. Stay tuned for more from Mike Small.
Hey, welcome back to the Killin' Me Smallz podcast, here with Jason Blevins from the Painted Lines, a Sixers reporter and somebody who's around the team quite a bit and has given us some great insights. Jason, getting back to where we were talking before the break, we were talking about the sequence of events that could happen if things go south with this team. And you're right, I agree with you. The first thing, you're not going to break up Embiid and Simmons without giving another coach a chance to try and fix it. I've been preaching that all year. The idea of breaking them up is ludicrous. You've got to figure out how to make it work. Now, I did see for the first time some signs in the Clippers game where that could work. I saw Ben and Joel looking for each other in the post. There was a little bit of pick and roll between the two, and Ben is becoming a very good role man. And I've also seen the fact that with Al Horford not in the lineup with the two of them, there's a little bit more space. Did you notice some of those things, and do you see some Brett trying some other things?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the things that I think people should take away from last night is that Ben is finally embracing, and he said it after the game, and Brett talked about it, embracing the fact that he really is a Swiss Army knife as a player. He's, I refer to him as the queen of the chessboard. He can essentially do any role on a team with the exception of space the floor, but you can use him 1, 3, 4, and 5. He's not really a shooting guard, but he can be used as a slasher. So his first 2 seasons, I think, was really important for him to be viewed as a point guard because there was a lot of debate whether he's a point guard. I think he's sort of recognizing that he's at his best when he defies a standard position description, and he talked about it last night, being able to guard 1 through 5, being able to be that Swiss Army knife on both ends of the floor, embracing that and allowing some of these other guys like a Josh Richardson, right, initiating in the pick and roll. They brought in Alec Burks, like a Furkan Korkmaz even, who Brett specifically called out as a pick and roll ball handler, not just a shooter. And being a weapon when those guys have the ball in their hands, I think will be huge for this team. So I did see that. I think it's huge. I think it's really important that moving Al Horford to the bench really gives them the 48 minutes of rim protection, which is really, that's the real reason he was brought in. It really had nothing to do with offense. It was the team fell off a cliff defensively when Joel Embiid left the floor in the playoffs last year, and they just can't afford to have that in the postseason. So
it's almost too simple of a solution. You know, we as fans have been screaming about it for weeks, and they finally did it. And you have to wonder. I guess a lot of it was for Horford's ego that it took so long, but it really just made so much sense along with the newcomers. Now, getting back to Simmons, I think I haven't missed a game this year, and I have not seen defense like he's been playing in a long time in the NBA. I'd be shocked if he's not Defensive Player of the Year. Aside from one really, really horrible performance in Miami against Jimmy Butler, he's been amazing this year. And, while you talk about the Swiss Army knife, I think that might be the most important part of it. The one concern that I have is, the Clippers played him straight up last night. And I do think that when you get to the playoffs, he's going to see a lot more packing it into the paint, a little bit, maybe not even zone, but more packing it in. And, the last thing you want to see him do is stop in the paint, turn around and fire that crazy shot behind him. Although it was nice to see some more cutting to the basket to help him out yesterday. Do you think he's getting the confidence to be able to, as you said, kind of fight through some of that stuff, go to the basket, get fouled, not worry about them packing it into the paint?
Well, I think that's why it's so important, the emergence of Furkan Korkmaz as being someone that the other team has to have in their pregame sort of scouting report. That I think opened up a lot last night. You see Furkan had 0 points, 0 for 5 from the floor, but the way that the Clippers guarded him is completely different from the way he was guarded the 2 nights prior.
Oh, they were ready for him, no doubt.
Yeah, but that in many ways, the fact that they were ready for him meant, what's the practical effect of that? It means they're stepping out maybe 2 or 3 feet further out, which creates passing lanes, creates driving lanes, creates cutting lanes for other people. And that's really why it's important to have guys like that, right? So, and then Glenn Robinson being a dangerous threat from the corners, I think is really important. They're replacing James Ennis, who's like a 30%, 32% shooter from the corners, with Glenn Robinson, who can defend. He can knock down that shot. I think that's really
cuts to the
important
basket really well too, which I didn't know he had that in him.
He does. Yeah. So whatever the more guys you can have that force the defense to be honest, and play them straight up, the more that opens up attacking the rim from Josh Richardson and Ben Simmons. So all of these things sort of feed each other. It's important for everyone to be able to sort of create different pressures and different decisions on the part of the opposing team. So going back to your point, is in the playoffs, will anybody be willing to sag into a zone and just take away those attacking of the rim? It's really important for these other guys to be credible threats.
Yeah, I mean the same thing happened against Boston 2 years ago, and the Sixers had JJ Redick the last 2 years, and the same thing happened a little bit against Toronto. Although they were better against it. So you're right, it's something they have to get better. But more importantly than anything else, the elephant in the room that we haven't even discussed: why is this team so dominant at home and so bad on the road? I mean, I think the answer as to why they're so dominant at home is obvious. They like to play in front of an electric crowd. They're all big game type guys. They like the lights on, etc. But the dichotomy of the road is just mind-boggling.
Yeah. So what I'll say is the trade deadline was last week, and we talked to some of the players who left and asked that question, like, what is the difference? And part of the issue is the road can be a galvanizing force for a team. They're forced to spend more time with each other. But for a team that doesn't have a lot of common ground off the floor, they just haven't found that sort of bunker mentality where they're all hanging out together in the hotel and really coming together. And
Well, they hung out at the Super Bowl and got waxed the next day.
Well, yeah. So I think the other part is that I think they're a very emotionally driven team that feeds off of the energy of the crowd. If you go through the games on the road, it's less about the opponent, and I think, my personal opinion, it's more about the energy of the opposing crowd. So this is a team that, and I've talked to Joel for more than a year about this, because I noticed it first in a road game in DC I was covering. And DC just doesn't have a lively crowd. They show up late. They don't have a lot of energy. There's maybe 16,000 people, but they don't bring a lot of energy to the game. And you could see that he especially had nothing to feed off of. So I think there's an emotional side of it where, even when you're booing, you're bringing an intensity to these players that they can feed off of. You see that they tend to play well in places like Los Angeles or Portland or Houston, where they have really good crowds. They play really bad in places like Orlando, which you and I were both there last week.
Yep.
Orlando and Cleveland and name another city with or even Miami with kind of late arriving, dead, lifeless crowd. They don't play well. So to me, that is an indicator of a potential reason for this huge split.
Which would give you,
does that matter?
Yeah, which would give you some reason to be confident about turning the switch on in the playoffs. But I've got to make a bit of a switch here in the topic.
Yeah.
How much of that is the coach? I mean, isn't it the coach's job? One, I'm gonna ask you a couple of hard questions. One, why did it take him so long to move Horford to the bench when it seemed obvious? Two, why did it take him so long to set plays up for Simmons and Embiid like we finally saw last night? And three, why can't the coach come up with a way to get this team to play on the road?
What I wonder is, we just saw Andy Reid win a Super Bowl, and Andy Reid was in Philadelphia for 14 years, something like that. And by the last few years, the team had pretty much heard everything he had to say. Didn't make him a bad coach, but they'd kind of heard everything. And Brett talks about having only so many bullets to fire as a coach to wake his team up. There may just be a tuning out effect where they've heard all of the Brett Brown isms in the locker room so many times that it doesn't have the same kind of impact. And then going back to to your question about why did it take so long for him to be able to utilize these two together? Well, it was one game, and it was a game coming off, like I said, where you had seen a role player drop 30 points in back-to-back games, which created space. And you had a West Coast team on the last game of a road trip before the All-Star break. I don't want to read too much into the one game. They had a lot of reasons to play well. The Clippers had plenty of reasons to not be on their best. I don't think that they were unmotivated, but if you look at it, I wouldn't read too much into the one game.
No, I hear you, but it's just I think it gets more to what you said a few minutes ago, which is, they've been hearing the same voice for 7 years. And my question is, unless something falls apart here during the regular season, Brett's going to coach them through the postseason. And the question is, if they had to replace him at the end of the year, I don't think there's any. It's not like the NFL where there's a bunch of superstar coaches laying around where you could grab one and all of a sudden say, okay, let's go get Urban Meyer, or, or something like that. It's not like that in college. You're not going to go get, Mike Krzyzewski or Roy Williams or Bill Self to come in. So I don't even know what kind of coach would replace him. Is it a fiery young guy? Is it, more of a grizzled veteran recycled guy like a Ty Lue? I have no idea. But I think you're right. I think that unless something incredible happens, I think this is going to be the swan song for Brett.
Yeah, I think they need to go to the NBA Finals, and they need to show. I was impressed by him last year in the playoffs. I think he managed each of those series really well in his
I did too. I agree with you.
I don't think that.
Except for the last 3 minutes of Game 7, I'll never forgive those shot clock violations. I know a lot of that was Jimmy Butler, but I do put a lot of that on him.
Jimmy Butler's a whole different can of worms.
I know he's not your favorite.
Well, I mean, I don't find him to be an authentic person in any real tangible way. On or off the court, I don't find him to be authentic. I think if you look at Game 1 in that series and Game 7, like you said, there's some real questionable decision making, questionable shot selection, a lot of it that he would not take any responsibility for whatsoever. I think he's generally a very divisive person. He will tell you that he's not, but he is. He will admit to be provocative, but I think he picks his favorite players and his players to bully, and that creates divisions. I think he's got a history of leaving disaster in his wake and somehow convincing a portion of the public to look at those teams and say, see, they were better off with him. They never should have gotten rid of him. So anyway, I digress. I do think his adjustments were really good.
I knew I opened up a can of worms on that one.
I think having Greg Monroe on that team and Boban Marjanovic were quite frankly bad decisions from a roster standpoint. I like Boban as a sort of a utility situational center. I think having Greg Monroe didn't make a lot of sense for me. To be perfectly honest with you, I would rather have had, and I said this last year, Norvell Pell on that playoff roster than Greg Monroe. Didn't understand it. You just have to have someone that is some sort of deterrent factor down low, protecting the rim. I don't think that anything Greg Monroe is going to give you offensively would counteract his complete inability to protect the rim, and I think that really killed them in that series. So this last shot notwithstanding, I think Brett did a really, really good job as a tactical game by game adjuster in the playoffs last year. So if you look at, he's played 4 playoff series with this team. He, in my opinion, has only been outcoached in one of those. I think he was a really good coach in the other 3. So I think he's a very good coach. He's the kind of guy, and I think there's the parallels with Andy Reid are really pretty close. Would not surprise me at all if he went on to another team, if it doesn't work out here, and was wildly successful. Does he have some fatigue dealing with the young personalities and sort of the 7 years of sort of novice basketball players? He might have some fatigue. Do they tune him out? They may tune him out. But then when you ask, like, who would replace him, it's a great question, but I don't think it's for us to know. And I think the NBA is intentionally vague. They do not make their assistant coaches available like the NFL does. So it's really hard to get a read on who the top assistants are, what their special sauce is. I'm not a huge fan of like regurgitating failed head coaches from other situations. So, I don't have the answer for who would replace him. Again, I think he's a really good head coach. And the fan base, for as much as I criticized them early on in this discussion, they may have delivered a wake-up call that Brett himself could never have done.
Well, I think the bottom line is if this team can get it together and have the emotional intelligence to put it together like they did last night and like they did against the Lakers and like they have in so many other big games at home and can do that in the playoffs, then we won't even be talking about this. Jason, I can't thank you enough for putting the time in and joining the podcast. You always deliver very insightful, thoughtful comments, and I'm thrilled to have you on.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me back.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Killin' Me Smallz podcast. Please make sure you go on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Give us a rating, give us a review, and give Jason a follow on Twitter. How do they follow you?
I have too many followers as it is.
You don't want more
Jay
followers?
Blevins, not really. It's less joyful than you'd think. Jay Blevins, NBA on Twitter. And I will continue to say what I think people need to hear versus what they maybe want to hear.
And that's why people need to follow you. Thanks a lot, Jason. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Hello, everyone. It's Olympic gold medalist Summer Sanders. Now, as a champion, I rarely settle for anything but the best. So, you guys, get the best podcast for sports in the Philadelphia area. Killin' Me Smallz with Mike Small. Dude knows his sports, and it's going to be the absolute best. Enjoy.